Hello, everyone. Welcome to Blacktop Files. Tonight, we bring you 8 accounts from those who guard the oldest mountains in America. Park rangers who witnessed things in the Appalachian wilderness that no training manual could prepare them for. The Appalachian Range stretches nearly 2,000 miles from Georgia to Maine, home to some of the most isolated and unforgiving terrain on the eastern seaboard. These mountains are ancient, worn down by time into dark hollows and endless ridge lines where cell signals die and compasses spin, where the trees grow so thick that noon looks like dusk. The people who work these forests, the rangers, the fire lookouts, the trail crews, they see things, they find things, and sometimes they're found by things that were never supposed to exist. What you're about to hear are testimonies from men and women who've walked those trails, who've answered calls in the deep woods, who've spent nights in ranger stations miles from the nearest road. These are the stories they don't put in the incident reports. These are the things that made them question whether they were alone out there. Listen carefully, because if you've ever felt watched on a mountain trail, if you've ever heard footsteps that weren't yours echoing through the trees, you might recognize what they're describing. And if you're planning a trip into the Appalachians, you might want to reconsider going off trail. Stay with us until the end. You won't want to miss what these rangers have to say.
This happened in the fall of 2017, when I was 31 and working my 4th season as a backcountry ranger in the Cherokee National Forest in eastern Tennessee. My name's Connor, originally from Knoxville, and I took the ranger job because I loved the wilderness, loved the solitude of it. I'd done regular patrol work for 2 years before they offered me the backcountry position, which meant longer shifts, more remote areas, and a lot more time alone. That suited me fine. I was good at being alone. The Cherokee Forest covers more than 650,000 acres, and my assigned territory that season included a section of the Bald Mountains and the drainages feeding into the Nolichucky River. Beautiful country, steep and wild, with old-growth sections that hadn't seen a chainsaw in a century. The trails were moderate to difficult, popular enough in summer but mostly empty once October hit and the leaves started falling. That's when I liked it best. Just me, the mountains, and the quiet. It was mid-October when I got called in for what should have been a routine welfare check. Dispatch radioed me around 10 in the morning. A day hiker had reported seeing a tent set up about 2 miles off the Jennett Ridge Trail, back in an area that wasn't designated for camping. The hiker said the tent looked old, weathered, and there was no response when they called out. Standard protocol was to hike in, make contact, explain the camping regulations, and either escort the camper out or issue a citation if they got hostile about it. I'd done it dozens of times. I geared up at the ranger station and headed out around 11. It was a grey day, overcast and cold, the kind of October weather that makes you think winter's coming early. The leaves were already down in thick carpets, muffling my footsteps as I followed the ridge trail east. The area where the tent had been spotted was in a drainage hollow about a quarter mile below the ridgeline, accessible only by scrambling down through the laurel thickets. Not an easy camp spot to reach, which was odd. People who camp illegally usually do it close to the trail, not deep in the bush where it's hard to haul gear. I found the cutoff point the hiker had marked on my map and started working my way downslope. The laurel was dense, twisted branches forming tunnels that blocked out what little daylight filtered through the clouds. I had to crouch and push through in places, my pack snagging on branches. It took me 20 minutes to cover that quarter mile. When I finally broke through into the hollow, I saw the tent immediately. It was set up on a small flat area near a seasonal creek, mostly dry now, just a trickle running over stones. The tent was a dome style, maybe a 3-person capacity, and the hiker had been right. It looked old. The fabric was sun-faded to a dull grey-green, patched in several places with duct tape that had gone brittle and peeling. One of the guy lines was frayed and the rainfly sagged in the middle. No campfire ring, no gear visible outside, no sound or movement. I stopped about 30 feet away and called out, "Hello, Ranger Service. Anyone here?" My voice echoed slightly in the hollow and then got swallowed by the trees. No response. I waited, listening. The woods were quiet. Not the peaceful quiet you get sometimes, but the heavy, watchful quiet that makes the hair on your neck stand up. No birds, no squirrels rustling in the leaves. Just the faint trickle of the creek. I called out again, louder. "This is the U.S. Forest Service. You're camping in a non-designated area. I need to speak with you." Still nothing. I approached slowly, watching the tent for any movement. As I got closer, I could see the zipper on the door was pulled shut, but not completely. There was about a 6-inch gap at the bottom. I stopped at the entrance and knocked on the aluminum tent pole. "Anybody home?" Silence. I hesitated, then reached down and pulled the zipper open. The smell hit me first. Musty, sour, like old sweat and damp fabric that had been closed up for too long. I pulled my flashlight and shone it inside. The tent was empty. No sleeping bag, no backpack, no gear at all except for a single item lying in the center of the floor. A pair of boots. They were old hiking boots, leather, worn down at the heels, laces still tied. They sat there neatly side by side, as if someone had just stepped out of them. I crouched and looked closer without going inside. The boots were dry, no mud on them despite the ground outside being damp. They looked like they'd been sitting there for a while. The leather had a greyish film of mildew on it. I straightened up and looked around the campsite again. There was no other gear, no sign of a pack or supplies, no trash, no fire ring, nothing, just the tent and the boots. I radioed dispatch and reported what I'd found. The dispatcher, a woman named Linda who'd been working the forest for 15 years, asked me to give her the exact coordinates. I read them off my GPS. There was a pause on her end, then she came back on. "Connor, can you confirm those coordinates?" "Confirmed," I said. "Why?" Another pause. "We've had reports from that area before. 3 times in the last 6 years, hikers have reported finding unoccupied tents in that drainage. Each time, rangers went in to investigate and found the tents empty. No campers, no gear, just the tent. Once there was a chair. Once there was a lantern. This time it's boots." I felt a chill run down my back that had nothing to do with the October cold. "What happened to the tents?" "We pulled them out, catalogued them as abandoned property. Never got any claims. We figured people were just ditching old gear they didn't want to pack out, but..." She trailed off. "But what?" "But the areas they were found kept moving. First report was about a mile west of where you are. Second was a half-mile south. Third was right on Jennett Ridge. Now you're a quarter mile. East of that, it's like whatever's leaving these things is circling the drainage." I looked at the tent again. In the grey daylight, it seemed almost to sag, as if something heavy were pressing down on it from above. "What do you want me to do?" "Standard protocol. Document it. See if there's any identification, then pack it out if you can. But Connor, be careful. If you see anyone in that area, if you hear anything, you radio immediately and get back to the trailhead. Understand?" "Understood." I clipped the radio back onto my belt and approached the tent again. I used my phone to take photos from multiple angles, then carefully reached inside and picked up one of the boots. It was heavy, waterlogged despite looking dry on the outside. When I turned it over, I saw something that made my hands go cold. Scratched into the sole, crude and deep, were 4 words: "Don't follow the steps." I set the boot down carefully and picked up its mate. Same message, scratched into the sole. "Don't follow the steps." The letters were uneven, carved with something sharp, maybe a knife or a rock edge. I took photos of the soles, then set the boots back down exactly as I'd found them. My mind was racing. Steps. What steps? I looked around the campsite, at the damp leaves and soft earth. No footprints. The ground was covered in leaf litter, but underneath it the soil was soft enough that boots should have left impressions. There was nothing. I spent the next 20 minutes doing a perimeter search, moving in widening circles around the tent. I found the seasonal creek bed and followed it downstream for about 100 yards, then upstream the same distance. Nothing. No footprints, no disturbed ground, no sign that anyone had been there. When I came back to the tent, I made the decision to collapse it and pack it out. I didn't want to leave it there. Something about it felt wrong, like it was a marker for something, a sign I couldn't read. I was pulling up the last tent stake when I heard it. Footsteps. Not on the trail above me, but down in the hollow, coming from the direction of the creek. Slow, measured footsteps, boots on leaves. I froze and listened. The steps came closer, steady and unhurried. I turned toward the sound, my hand dropping to the canister of bear spray on my belt. "Hello? Ranger Service. Identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. For maybe 10 seconds there was absolute silence. Then they started again. But this time they weren't coming toward me. They were circling. I could hear them moving through the laurel thicket to my right, keeping a constant distance, the rhythm never changing. Step, step, step. I turned to follow the sound, but it moved faster, circling behind me. I spun around. The steps were on my left now, still in the brush, still invisible. "I'm a federal ranger," I shouted. "Show yourself now." My voice sounded thin and scared even to my own ears. The steps stopped again. In the silence that followed, I heard something else. A sound, like breathing, deep and slow, but it was coming from multiple directions at once. From the trees above me, from the creek bed, from the laurel thicket on all sides. It was as if the whole hollow was breathing. I didn't wait to hear more. I grabbed the collapsed tent, shoved it under one arm, and started scrambling upslope toward the ridge trail. Behind me, the footsteps started again. Faster now, crashing through the brush. Not following me, running parallel, keeping pace. I could hear them on both sides, 2 sets of steps now, maybe 3, moving through the laurel like they knew every gap and tunnel. I fought my way uphill, branches tearing at my clothes, my breath coming in gasps. The footsteps stayed with me all the way to the ridgeline. When I burst out onto the trail, they stopped. I stood there shaking, gasping for air, listening. Nothing. The woods were silent again. I looked back down into the hollow, into the dark tangle of laurel and oak, and I swear I saw movement. Not one figure, but several. Shadows shifting between the trees. Too tall to be deer, too still to be hikers. They stood there, watching me. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran. I made it back to the ranger station in half the time it should have taken and reported everything to Linda. She logged it, told me to file a full report, and said she'd flag the area for temporary closure pending investigation. But when I went back 3 days later with 2 other rangers and a deputy from the county sheriff's office, we found nothing. The hollow was empty. No disturbed ground where the tent had been, no boot prints, nothing. It was as if no one had camped there at all. I kept the photos on my phone, and I filed my report exactly as it happened. The tent went into evidence storage at the district office. I never heard if anyone claimed it, but I did some digging in the old incident reports, going back 10 years. I found 6 other cases of abandoned tents in that same drainage system, all within a 2-mile radius. Each one had been found empty. Each one had contained a single item: boots, a chair, a lantern, a sleeping bag, a backpack, a jacket. And in 3 of the reports, the investigating ranger had noted hearing footsteps in the woods around the site. One of those rangers, a guy named Mike Stanton, who'd worked the forest in the early 2000s, had retired and moved to Florida. I tracked down his number and called him. He remembered the case immediately. He'd found a tent in 2004 with a sleeping bag inside, and the bag had been warm, like someone had just gotten out of it. He'd heard the footsteps too, circling him in the brush. He told me he'd made the decision right then to put in for a transfer. He'd been a ranger for 12 years, he said, and he'd seen black bears charge. He'd pulled bodies out of ravines. He'd dealt with meth labs hidden in the backcountry. None of it had scared him like those footsteps. "You want to know what I think?" he said. "I think there's something in that drainage that doesn't want people there. I think it's old, older than the Forest Service, older than the trails. And I think it leaves those tents as warnings. The question you have to ask yourself is, what happens if someone ignores the warning and goes looking for what's making those steps?" I didn't have an answer for him. I still don't. But I requested a territory reassignment at the end of that season, and I got it. I work the southern section of the Cherokee now, down near the Ocoee River. I don't go near the Bald Mountains anymore. And when hikers ask me about good off-trail camping spots, I tell them to stick to the designated sites. I tell them the backcountry isn't always empty, even when it looks like it is. Some of them listen. Most don't. I hope they stay lucky.
Our next story comes from a ranger who thought she understood what caused the disappearances in the Great Smoky Mountains until she found the stairs.
This happened in June of 2019 when I was 28 and working as a wilderness ranger in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. My name is Sarah. I'm from Asheville, North Carolina, and I'd taken the job right out of college 6 years earlier. The Smokies were my dream posting. Over 500,000 acres of protected wilderness straddling the Tennessee-North Carolina border, the most visited national park in the country. I loved the work despite the challenges, the crowds, the rescues, the people who thought a day hike to Clingman's Dome didn't require water or proper shoes. But the Smokies also had a darker reputation among those of us who work there. The park led the nation in missing persons cases. Every year, people walked into those mountains and never walked out. I'd been part of search and rescue operations before. Most of them ended with a found hiker, dehydrated and embarrassed. Some ended with a body recovered from a fall or a creek drowning. But there were others, maybe 5 or 6 in my time there, where we found nothing at all. No trace, no disturbed ground, no belongings, no scent trail for the dogs, just gone as if the mountain had opened up and swallowed them. In early June, I was assigned to a remote section of the park up near Cades Cove, an area called Rich Mountain. It's beautiful country, but steep and isolated, with old logging roads overgrown into hiking trails and sections of second-growth forest so thick you can barely see 10 feet in any direction. I was doing a multi-day patrol, checking trail conditions and campsites, documenting wildlife, the usual routine. I'd set up a base camp near a stream about 3 miles in, from the nearest trailhead, and was working my way through a grid pattern, covering about 5 miles a day. On my second day out, around mid-morning, I was hiking through a section of oak and hickory forest when I saw them. Stairs. They were just sitting there in the middle of the woods, about 40 feet off the trail I was following. A set of stairs, maybe 10 steps, leading up to nothing. They were made of wood, painted white, with a basic 2x4 construction, and a simple handrail on one side. They looked domestic, like something you'd see leading up to a front porch. But there was no porch, no house, no structure of any kind. Just the stairs sitting in the leaf litter, leading up 8 feet into empty air. I stopped and stared at them. In all my years working the Smokies, I'd never seen anything like it. I approached slowly, circling around to get a better look. The stairs were old but not ancient. The paint was faded and peeling, and the wood had weathered to a grayish tone, but the construction was still solid. No rot, no collapse. They sat perfectly level on the forest floor, and when I looked underneath, I could see they had no foundation, no posts driven into the ground. They were just sitting there, resting on the leaves, as if someone had carried them in and set them down. I pulled out my radio to report it, then hesitated. Report what, exactly? I'd found a piece of abandoned property. The park was full of old structures, homesteads, barns, stone walls, from farms that predated the park's establishment in the 1930s. But those were historical sites, marked and documented. These stairs weren't on any map. I took photos instead and marked the location on my GPS, planning to file a report when I got back to the ranger station. I was about to move on when I noticed something else. The leaves around the base of the stairs were disturbed, pushed aside in a pattern that looked like footprints. Small footprints, like a child's. I crouched down and examined them more closely. They were fresh. I could see the impression of treads, a sneaker pattern, pressed into the damp earth underneath the leaves. The prints led up to the stairs, then stopped. There were no prints leading away. A cold feeling settled into my stomach. I stood up and looked around the forest. Nothing moved. I called out, "Hello? Anyone out here?" My voice echoed through the trees and died. I waited, listening. The woods were quiet, but it was the wrong kind of quiet, the kind where you realize you haven't heard a bird in the last 5 minutes, haven't heard a squirrel or a chipmunk, haven't heard anything but your own breathing. I radioed it in. Dispatch connected me with my supervisor, a man named Tom Berkeley, who'd been working the Smokies for 20 years. I described what I'd found, the stairs, the footprints. There was a long pause before Tom came back on. "Sarah, I need you to move away from the stairs, at least 100 yards. Do it now, and don't look back at them." His tone made my skin crawl. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the stairs, and when I'd gone about 50 feet, I turned and walked quickly until I'd covered the distance Tom specified. I radioed back. "I'm clear. What's going on?" Another pause. "How long have you been working in the park?" 6 years. Then you've probably heard the stories, the missing people, the searches that go nowhere. His voice was careful, controlled. What I'm about to tell you isn't in any official report, and it's not something we talk about with the public. But rangers who work the backcountry long enough, we all see them eventually. The stairs. I felt my throat go dry. What are they? We don't know. They're not on any historical surveys. They're not marked on any maps. We find them all over the park, maybe 30, 40 documented sets, probably more that haven't been reported. They're always alone, always in the deep woods, and they're always different sizes, different styles. Some are metal, some are wood, some are stone. But they all have one thing in common. People who get too close to them don't always come back. I looked back in the direction I'd come, though I couldn't see the stairs anymore through the trees. You're saying those stairs are dangerous? I'm saying there's a correlation we can't explain. 5 years ago, we had a couple go missing up on Gregory Bald. 3 days into the search, one of our rangers found a set of stone stairs in the forest, about a mile from where the couple was last seen. At the base of the stairs, he found the woman's day pack. It was sitting there neatly, like someone had placed it there. We never found the couple. 2 years ago, a college kid disappeared on the Appalachian Trail near Charlie's Bunyan. His camera turned up at the base of a set of metal stairs half a mile from the trail. The last photo on the camera was of the stairs. He'd written in his journal that he wanted to climb them to see what the view was like from the top. Tom's voice dropped lower. We found the journal. We didn't find the kid. Jesus, I whispered. Listen to me carefully, Sarah. Do not approach the stairs again. Do not touch them. If you see anyone near them, civilian or otherwise, you order them away immediately. If they refuse, you radio for backup and you do not engage. Do you understand? I understand. My hands were shaking. But Tom, I found footprints. Small ones, like a kid's. They led up to the stairs and stopped. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought I'd lost the connection. Finally, Tom came back. We've had reports of that before. Footprints that lead to the stairs but not away. We don't know what it means, but Sarah, listen, there's no missing child report in this area. Those prints could be days old, weeks old. They could be from before you even started your patrol. But they looked fresh. I know they did. But I need you to trust me on this. Do not go back to those stairs. Mark the location, keep it in your report, and move on. And if you hear anything, anyone calling for help, anyone crying, especially a child, do not go toward the sound. Do not investigate. You radio it in, and you wait for backup. I wanted to ask him what kind of ranger ignores a child crying for help, but the tone in his voice stopped me. This was a man who'd seen something, who knew something he wasn't telling me. I swallowed hard. Okay, I'm moving on. Good. Keep your radio on. Check in every 2 hours. And Sarah, if you see more stairs, you report it immediately. I continued my patrol, but the day had changed. The forest felt different now, heavier, like it was pressing in on me from all sides. I found myself looking over my shoulder constantly, scanning the trees for movement. Every shadow looked like a figure. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. I covered my planned route quickly and got back to my base camp by 4 in the afternoon, 2 hours earlier than I'd intended. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those footprints, about a child walking up to those stairs and then vanishing. I kept hearing Tom's voice. If you hear anyone calling for help, especially a child, do not go toward the sound. What had happened in these woods that made a 20-year veteran ranger say something like that? Around midnight, I heard it. A voice, distant and faint, somewhere up the slope from my camp. A child's voice calling out, "Help me. Please help me." I'm lost. It was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, her voice high and frightened. Is anyone there? Please, I can't find my mom. I sat up in my tent, my heart hammering. Every instinct I had screamed at me to grab my flashlight and go find her. But Tom's voice was in my head. Do not go toward the sound. Do not investigate. I grabbed my radio instead. Dispatch, this is Ranger Hollis. I have a possible lost child in my area. I need backup immediately. My coordinates were already logged in the system. The voice came again, closer now. Please help me. I'm scared. I'm so scared. She was crying, her voice breaking. I don't want to be alone. I unzipped my tent and looked out into the darkness. I had my flashlight in one hand and my radio in the other. Dispatch came back. Backup is 40 minutes out, Sarah. Do you have visual on the child? Negative, audio only. She sounds close, maybe 50 yards upslope. The voice came again, and this time I pinpointed the direction. She was up the ridge, back toward where I'd found the stairs. Dispatch, the voice is coming from the direction of the stairs I reported. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Sarah, do not approach. Do you understand me? Do not approach. That's an order. The little girl's voice came again, and this time it was right outside my tent. Please help me. Please. I swung my flashlight toward the sound. There was nothing there, just trees and darkness, and the faint mist rising from the stream. But the voice was so close I should have been able to see her. I'm right here, the voice said, and it was no longer frightened. It was flat, emotionless. I'm right here. Why won't you help me? I backed into my tent and zipped it shut with shaking hands. Dispatch, the voice is outside my tent. I have no visual. Requesting immediate backup. Stay in your tent, Sarah. Do not open it. Do not respond to the voice. Backup is coming. For the next 30 minutes, the voice circled my tent. It didn't sound like a lost child anymore. It sounded like something trying to imitate a child. The inflection slightly wrong, the pauses too long. It called out to me, asking for help, saying it was cold, saying it was scared. Then it started saying other things. I know you're in there. I can hear your heart beating. Why won't you open the door? Don't you want to help me? There was a scraping sound against the side of my tent, like fingernails dragging across the nylon. Just open the door. Just let me in. I sat in the dark with my flashlight off, my radio clutched in my hand, too terrified to move. The scraping sound continued, moving around the tent in slow circles. At one point, I saw the shadow of a hand pressed against the tent wall from outside, but the hand was wrong. The fingers too long, the proportions all off. I bit down on my knuckle to keep from screaming. The voice stopped abruptly. For maybe 5 minutes, there was silence. Then I heard footsteps moving away, slow and deliberate, heading back up the ridge. They faded into the distance. I waited, barely breathing, until I saw flashlights coming down the trail and heard Tom's voice calling my name. I burst out of the tent. Tom and 2 other rangers were there, all armed, all looking grim. Tom grabbed my shoulder. Are you okay? I told him everything, the voice, the circling, the hand on the tent. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he nodded slowly. Pack up your gear. You're coming back to the station with us. Your patrol's over. What was that? I asked. Like, what the hell was that? Tom looked up the slope into the darkness where the stairs were hidden. We call them mimics. We don't know what they are, whether they're something that's always been in these mountains or something that came with the stairs, but they imitate voices, human voices, usually children or people in distress. They use those voices to lure people off the trails, away from safety. And if you follow the voice, you end up at the stairs. That's where the trail ends. What happens if you climb the stairs? Tom's face was pale in the flashlight beam. We don't know. No one who's climbed them has ever come back. We had a ranger 10 years ago who didn't listen. He found a set of stairs, heard a voice calling for help, and he climbed up to try to see where the voice was coming from. His partner watched him reach the top step, and then he just vanished. 1 second he was there, standing on the top step, and the next he was gone. No sound, no flash of light, nothing. We searched for 3 weeks, never found a trace. I felt sick. How many sets of stairs are in the park? We've documented 37, but there could be more. They move sometimes, or new ones appear. We don't know. The Park Service doesn't officially acknowledge them. If we did, we'd have to explain why we're not removing them or blocking them off, and the truth is we're too afraid to try. The one time we attempted to demolish a set, this was back in the 90s. The crew that went in to do it all came down with severe medical issues within a week. Organ failure, brain hemorrhages, cancer. 5 men, all healthy, all dead within a year. We don't touch the stairs anymore. We hiked out that night, all of us together, no one speaking. When we reached the trailhead and the safety of the parking lot, I looked back into the forest. I couldn't see anything but darkness and trees, but I felt like something was watching us leave. Something patient and old and utterly inhuman. I finished out the season, but I requested a transfer in September. I work at Blue Ridge Parkway now, mostly visitor centers and educational programs. I don't do backcountry patrols anymore. I can't. Because every time I'm alone in the woods, every time I hear a child's voice or see a structure that doesn't belong, I remember that night. I remember the hand pressed against my tent, the fingers too long, the voice that wasn't quite right. And I remember Tom's words, "No one who's climbed them has ever come back. If you hike in the Smokies, stay on the trails. If you see stairs in the woods, turn around and walk away. And if you hear a child crying for help in the middle of the night, miles from any road or campground, don't go looking for them. It's not a child. It's never a child."
The next account comes from someone who learned why old fire towers in Appalachia are always locked from the outside.
This happened in August of 2016, when I was 33 and working as a fire lookout for the Virginia Department of Forestry in the George Washington National Forest. My name's Marcus. I'm originally from Richmond, and I had taken the lookout job as a summer position while I worked on my master's thesis in forestry management. The job was simple: spend 8-hour shifts in a fire tower scanning the surrounding forest for smoke, take weather readings, report any suspicious activity. It paid decently and gave me plenty of time to write. I figured it was perfect. The tower I was assigned to was called Reddish Knob Tower, sitting at just over 4,000 feet elevation in the mountains west of Harrisonburg. It was one of the older towers in the system, built in the 1930s by the Civilian Conservation Corps. A steel frame structure about 50 feet tall with a small, enclosed cabin at the top. The cabin was maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with windows on all 4 sides, a desk, a radio, a logbook, and a wood stove for cold weather. Access was by an exterior staircase that wrapped around the tower frame, open to the air, with a landing at the top and a door that opened into the cabin. The tower was remote. The access road was 7 miles of gravel that turned to dirt for the last 2 miles, and the nearest town was Harrisonburg, over an hour away. Cell service was non-existent. If I needed help, I had the radio, but that was it. I didn't mind. I'd grown up hiking and camping, and solitude didn't bother me. The first few weeks were easy. I'd show up at 7 in the morning, climb the tower, do my scans every 30 minutes, log weather data, eat my lunch while I rode, and head out at 3 in the afternoon. The view was incredible. Ridge after ridge of green mountains rolling away to the horizons. The valleys thick with morning fog that burned off by mid-morning. It was in my 4th week that I noticed something off. I climbed up one morning in early August, unlocked the cabin door. It was always locked when I wasn't there. Standard procedure to keep vandals out, and found the logbook open on the desk. I'd left it closed the day before. I was sure of it. The page it was open to was from 3 years earlier, a date in September 2013. Someone had written an entry that day in handwriting that wasn't mine, wasn't any of the other lookouts I'd met. Heard knocking on the door at 2 p.m. No one there when I opened it. Knocking continued after I locked it again. I stared at the entry. There was no signature, no name. I flipped back through the logbook. The regular entries were there. Weather data, smoke reports, routine observations. But scattered among them, maybe once every 20 or 30 pages, were these other entries. Always short, always strange. Footsteps on the stairs. Counted 37 steps. Tower only has 32. Saw a figure standing at the tree line below tower. Watched it through binoculars for 10 minutes. It never moved. When I looked again, it was gone. Heard a voice calling my name from inside the cabin. I was alone. I felt a chill despite the August heat. I radioed the district office and asked to speak with my supervisor, a man named Ray Hodges. When he came on, I told him about the entries. There was a long pause. "Marcus, how many of those entries have you found?" "I don't know. Maybe 8 or 10 going back 3 years. There might be more if I keep looking." "Don't." Ray's voice was sharp. "Don't read any more of them. Just do your job and ignore the logbook except for your required entries." "Ray, what's going on? Who wrote these?" Another pause. "Different people. Lookouts who worked Reddish Knob before you. Most of them didn't last more than a few weeks. We've had trouble keeping that tower staffed." "Why?" "Because strange things happen up there, Marcus. Things we can't explain. I'm not going to lie to you. We've had 4 people quit that tower in the last 5 years. They all reported the same kinds of experiences, noises they couldn't account for, things moving in the cabin when they weren't looking, feelings of being watched. One woman said she heard someone walking around the cabin on the outside catwalk at midnight when she'd stayed late to log a storm. She looked out and didn't see anyone, but the footsteps kept circling the tower for over an hour. My mouth went dry. Jesus, why didn't you tell me this before you assigned me here? Because most people never experience anything. Most lookouts work Reddish Knob for full seasons without incident. We thought the people who quit were just spooked by isolation, or maybe pulling pranks on the next person. But I'll be straight with you. If you want to transfer to a different tower, I can arrange it. No questions asked. I thought about it. I needed the job, and I didn't want to look like I was scared off by ghost stories. I'll stay, but if something happens, I'm documenting it. That's fine. Just don't go looking for trouble. And Marcus, if you ever feel like you're in danger, you get down from that tower immediately and you call me. Don't try to tough it out. Understand? I said I understood and signed off. The rest of that day passed without incident. I tried not to think about the logbook entries, but they stayed in my head. When I logged up at 3 and climbed down, I found myself counting the steps. 32. The logbook entry had said 37. Where would 5 extra steps come from? For the next week, nothing happened. I started to relax, thinking maybe Ray was right, and the previous lookouts had just been paranoid. Then, on a Thursday morning in mid-August, I climbed the tower and found the door to the cabin wide open. I'd locked it when I left the day before. I was certain of it. I always double-checked the padlock before I started down. I climbed onto the landing and looked inside. The cabin was empty, nothing disturbed. But the air inside felt wrong. It was cold, much colder than it should have been on an August morning. I could see my breath. I radioed Ray and reported it. He asked if anything was missing or damaged. I checked. Everything was in place. He told me to log it and keep working. I did, but I left the door open while I worked, uncomfortable with the idea of being closed in. By noon, the cabin had warmed up to normal temperature. I chalked it up to some weird weather phenomenon and tried to forget about it. That afternoon, around 2 o'clock, I heard the knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the cabin door. I looked up from my thesis notes. The door was still open, propped with a wooden wedge I'd placed there. The knocking came again, 3 knocks, but this time it was on the back wall of the cabin, the side that faced away from the landing. I stood up and looked out the back window. There was nothing there, just the tower frame and the forest 50 feet below. The knocking came again on the left wall now, then the right, then above me on the roof. 3 hard knocks that made the whole cabin rattle. I grabbed the radio. "Ray, I've got a situation up here." "What kind of situation?" "Someone's knocking on the tower, all around the cabin. But there's no one here. Get down, Marcus. Get down right now." I didn't argue. I grabbed my pack and stepped out onto the landing. The knocking followed me, now coming from underneath the platform. Hollow, booming sounds on the metal. I started down the stairs as fast as I could without losing my footing. The knocking moved with me, staying just behind, each impact loud enough to vibrate the tower frame. I could feel it in the railing under my hands. When I reached the ground, the knocking stopped. I stood at the base of the tower, breathing hard, and looked up. The cabin was visible at the top, windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Nothing moved. I waited for 5 minutes, then radioed Ray. "I'm at the base. Whatever it was, it stopped." "Are you okay?" "Yeah. Shaken up, but okay. I'm pulling you off Reddish Knob. Effective immediately. I'll find you another tower." "Ray, wait. I want to know what's happening up there. Has anyone ever figured it out?" There was a long silence. 15 years ago, we had a lookout at Reddish Knob named David Marsh. He was experienced, had worked fire towers for a decade. He reported the same things you and the others reported. Knocking, voices, footsteps. But he didn't quit. He wanted to figure out what was causing it. He started staying overnight, logging everything he experienced. After 3 weeks of this, he stopped responding to radio checks. We sent someone up to investigate and found the cabin lock from the inside. We had to cut the lock. David was in there, sitting at the desk, dead. "Heart attack," the coroner said. But Marcus, his face, he looked terrified. And he had written something in the logbook, the last entry. Just one line. It came up the stairs, but it didn't go back down. I felt ice water run down my spine. What does that mean? We don't know. But after David died, we started keeping the cabin locked whenever it's not occupied. We thought maybe that would keep whatever it is outside. But the knocking still happens. The voices still happen. And now, you're telling me the door was open when you arrived today, even though you locked it yesterday? I looked up at the tower again. The cabin door was closed. Now, I could see it clearly from the ground. Ray, I left that door open when I came down. I propped it with a wedge. Jesus. Get out of there, Marcus. Get in your truck and drive to the district office. We're closing Reddish Knob for the rest of the season. I didn't need to be told twice. I walked quickly to my truck, parked about 100 feet from the tower base, and got in. As I started the engine, I looked back one more time. There was a figure standing on the tower landing, silhouetted against the cabin door. Tall, thin, motionless. It was there for maybe 3 seconds, and then he stepped backward into the cabin and closed the door. I drove away faster than I should have on that dirt road and didn't stop until I reached pavement. Ray met me at the district office and took my statement. He told me they'd send a team up to secure the tower and investigate, but when they went up 3 days later, they found nothing unusual. The cabin was empty. The door was locked with my padlock still in place, and there was no sign of any intrusion. The logbook was sitting on the desk, open to a blank page. Someone had written a new entry, dated the day I had fled. He left. Good. I transferred to a different tower in the National Forest and finished out the season there. I never went back to Reddish Knob. But I did some research, digging through old records at the district office. I found out that before the tower was built, there'd been an old homestead on that ridge. A family named Keller had lived there in the 1800s. Subsistence farmers scraping by on the thin mountain soil. In the winter of 1887, during a particularly brutal cold snap, the whole family had died. Parents and 3 children. Hypothermia, the record said. Their bodies weren't found until spring. The tower was built right where their cabin had stood. And according to the survey maps, the old cabin's chimney foundation was located directly beneath the tower's center post. I don't know if that means anything. I don't know if the knocking and the voices and the figure I saw are connected to the Keller family, or if there's something else entirely, but I do know this. There are places in these mountains where the past doesn't stay buried. There are places where something remains, waiting in the cold and the silence. And sometimes, when you're alone at 4,000 feet with nothing but steel and glass between you and the forest, that something tries to come inside. I work urban forestry now, city parks in Richmond. I don't go into the backcountry anymore. I don't climb fire towers. And when people ask me about my time as a lookout, I tell them it was peaceful, quiet, nothing unusual. But at night, sometimes I still hear it. 3 slow knocks, patient and deliberate, like something asking permission to enter. I never answer.
This next testimony comes from a ranger who discovered that some caves in West Virginia shouldn't be explored, even in emergencies.
This happened in March of 2018 when I was 36 and working as a law enforcement ranger for the New River Gorge National River in West Virginia. I'm originally from Charleston, I'm David, and I'd been with the Park Service for 11 years, 8 of them at New River Gorge. It's a beautiful area. The gorge itself is over 50 miles long, carved by the New River through the Appalachian Plateau, with whitewater rapids, dense forest, and some of the best rock climbing on the East Coast. It's also rugged and dangerous. The cliffs are high, the river is fast, and people get hurt or lost regularly. In mid-March, we got a call from a rock climber who'd been ascending a route on the gorge's south rim. His climbing partner had fallen, maybe a 20-foot drop, and had landed on a ledge. The partner was conscious, but had a badly broken leg and couldn't climb or rappel. The ledge was accessed by a narrow crack system that opened onto a small shelf about 300 feet above the river. Normally, we'd bring in a helicopter for a rescue like this, but the weather was bad, low clouds and mist, and the pilot refused to fly. That meant a ground rescue. Rappel down, stabilize the victim, and haul them up. I was part of the 3-person team that went in. We rigged anchors at the top of the cliff and rappelled down to the ledge. The injured climber was in rough shape, compound fracture of the tibia, in shock, hypothermic from lying on the cold stone. We stabilized him, got him warm, and called up to the team at the top that we were ready to haul. That's when we hit a problem. The rope system jammed about halfway up the cliff face. Something had gone wrong with the pulleys, and the load wasn't moving. The team at the top said they needed at least an hour to re-rig. We were stuck on that ledge with a victim who needed a hospital. The ledge was small, maybe 8 feet deep and 12 feet wide, barely enough room for the 3 of us and the gear. One of the other rangers, a woman named Kelly, noticed something while we were waiting. At the back of the ledge, behind a curtain of ivy and roots, there was an opening in the rock face. A cave entrance, maybe 3 feet high and 2 feet wide. She shone her flashlight inside. It goes back pretty far, looks like it opens up. I moved over and looked. The passage beyond the entrance sloped downward and to the right, widening after about 10 feet into what looked like a larger chamber. I could feel air moving, not wind, but a slow, steady draft, cool and damp. That meant the cave system connected to something deeper, probably had multiple openings. "We're not going in there," I said. "We wait for the re-rig." But our victim was deteriorating. His blood pressure was dropping, and he was becoming less responsive. Kelly checked her watch. "We're at 45 minutes. If that re-rig takes longer, he might not make it. She looked at the cave entrance. What if there's another way out? If this cave connects to the gorge floor or to another access point, we could carry him out on foot instead of waiting for the haul. I didn't like it. Cave rescue is specialized work, and none of us were trained cavers. But she had a point. If the cave system did connect to lower ground, we could save critical time. I radioed up to the team at the top and explained the situation. My supervisor, a man named Greg Fontaine, told me to assess the cave but not commit to anything until I knew where it went. If it's a dead end or if it gets technical, you come back and wait for the re-rig, he said. Don't take risks. Kelly and I left the third ranger, a guy named Mike, with the victim and squeezed through the entrance. We had helmets, headlamps, basic climbing gear, and a radio. The passage beyond the entrance was tight for about 15 feet, then opened into a chamber maybe 20 feet across and 10 feet high. The walls were limestone, slick with moisture, and the floor was uneven, covered with breakdown, chunks of rock that had fallen from the ceiling. The air smelled like wet stone and earth, with an underlying odor I couldn't place, something organic and unpleasant. Kelly swept her light around the chamber. There were 3 passages leading out. One sloped upward, one continued level, and one descended sharply. We checked the upward passage first. It pinched off after 30 feet, too narrow to pass. The level passage was more promising. It was wider, maybe 4 feet across, and the floor was relatively smooth. We followed it for about 50 yards. The walls were covered in formations, flowstone and small stalactites, and the passage curved gently to the left. Then we came to a junction. The passage split into 2, both continuing into darkness. This is getting complicated, I said. We don't have a map, and we're not leaving a trail. If we get lost in here, we're screwed. Kelly nodded. One more junction. If we don't find an exit by then, we turn around. We took the right-hand passage. It descended gradually, the air getting colder. After maybe 100 feet, we entered another chamber, larger than the first. Our lights couldn't reach the far walls. The ceiling was high, lost in shadow, and that's when we saw them, the marks. The walls of the chamber were covered in scratches, deep gouges in the limestone, running in parallel lines like something with claws had dragged them across the stone. The gouges were everywhere, some fresh enough that white limestone dust still clung to the grooves, others older and darkened with mineral deposits. Kelly approached one wall and touched the marks. What could do this? I didn't answer. I was looking at the floor. There were bones scattered across it, small ones mostly, rodents, bats, but also larger bones that might have been deer or coyote. They were cracked open, the marrow gone. And there were other things, pieces of fabric, rotted and moldy, a rusted flashlight, a boot with the sole torn away. We need to leave, I said quietly. Kelly was staring at something across the chamber. David, look. I followed her light. On the far side of the chamber there was a shape. At first I thought it was a rock formation, a stalagmite or a column, but as we got closer I realized it was too regular, too symmetrical. It was a cairn, a pile of stones stacked carefully about 4 feet high, and sitting on top of the cairn was a skull, a human skull, yellowed with age, the jaw missing. Jesus Christ, Kelly whispered. The skull was facing us, the empty eye sockets reflecting our lights. Around the base of the cairn were more bones, arranged in a circle. Human bones, ribs, vertebrae, long bones. Someone had placed them there deliberately. This wasn't a burial. This was something else. I grabbed Kelly's arm. We're leaving, now. We turned to go back the way we came, and that's when we heard it. A sound from somewhere deeper in the cave system, echoing through the passages. A long, low moan that rose and fell, almost like a voice, but not quite. It reverberated through the chamber, making the air vibrate. We froze. The sound came again, closer, and this time it was followed by another sound, dragging. Something heavy being pulled across stone, slow and rhythmic. Move! I hissed. We ran back toward the passage we'd come through, our lights bouncing wildly. Behind us, the dragging sound continued, getting louder. I risked a glance back and saw movement at the far end of the chamber, a shape emerging from one of the lower passages, something large and pale that reflected our lights with a wet gleam. I didn't stop to see more. We reached the passage and scrambled through it, Kelly ahead of me. My radio was crackling with static, Greg's voice breaking through. David! Report! Status! I couldn't answer. Didn't have breath to answer. We reached the junction and took the left turn, then hit the tight squeeze that led back to the entrance chamber. Kelly went through first. I was right behind her when I felt something grab my ankle. I looked down. A hand, pale, filthy, with broken nails, had come through a crack in the rock wall and was gripping my boot. I screamed and kicked, and the hand released. I lunged forward through the squeeze and tumbled into the entrance chamber. Kelly pulled me to my feet. What was that? I don't know. Go. We crawled through the entrance and out onto the ledge. Mike was staring at us, wide-eyed. What the hell happened? Radio up, I gasped. Tell them to haul now. We're not waiting. Mike got on the radio while Kelly and I caught our breath. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely clip into the rope. From inside the cave, I could hear the dragging sound getting closer. It stopped just inside the entrance, and in the silence that followed, I heard breathing. Slow, wet, raspy breathing that echoed from the passage. The rope system came tight, and we started the haul. It took 20 minutes to get the victim to the top. Then, another 10 to get the three of us up. By the time we reached the rim, it was starting to get dark. We loaded the victim into the ambulance and sent him to the hospital. He survived, made a full recovery, but Kelly and I didn't say anything about what we'd seen in the cave. We filed a report that said we'd assessed the cave and determined it wasn't a viable rescue route. We didn't mention the cairn, the bones, or the thing in the lower passages. A week later, I did some digging in the park archives. I found references to the cave system below the south rim. Locals called it the Scratch Caves, and there were stories going back to the 1800s about people disappearing near the entrances. In 1923, a group of 4 cavers had entered the system to map it. Only one came out. He was found 3 days later, wandering on the gorge rim, incoherent and covered in scratches. He died in a hospital 2 days after that, from infection and dehydration. Before he died, he told the doctors that something lived in the deep passages, something that dragged its prey back to a central chamber where it kept trophies. He said it was older than the caves, and it didn't like light. The Park Service closed the known entrances to the Scratch Caves in the 1970s, sealing them with metal grates. But there are dozens of entrances along the gorge, most of them unmapped, and every few years, someone finds a new one. In 2005, a hiker exploring a ledge system found an opening and went inside. His body was found 2 weeks later, 300 feet into the cave. He'd been dragged. The medical examiner could tell from the abrasions on his clothing and skin. His flashlight was never found. I left the New River Gorge in 2019 and took a position with the National Park Service in the Midwest, far from caves and cliffs. Kelly transferred out 6 months after the incident. We never talked about what we saw, not even with each other. But I think about it sometimes, late at night. I think about the cairn and the bones, the scratches on the walls, and the hand that grabbed my ankle. And I think about the skull sitting on top of that pile of stones, facing the passage like it was watching for something. I wonder how many other cairns are down there, in chambers we didn't find. I wonder how many people have been dragged into the dark and never came back. If you visit the New River Gorge, stay on the trails. Don't explore the caves even if they look inviting. Don't follow passages that lead downward. And if you hear something moving in the dark, something that breathes and drags and moans, don't try to find out what it is. Just run, because some places in these mountains belong to things that were here before us, and they don't appreciate visitors.
Our next ranger worked the Blue Ridge Parkway and found out why certain overlooks are always empty, even on summer weekends.
This happened in July of 2015 when I was 29 and working as an interpretive ranger for the Blue Ridge Parkway in North Carolina. My name's Rebecca, I'm from Boone, and I'd been with the Parkway Service for 3 years. The Blue Ridge Parkway is one of the most scenic drives in America, 469 miles of 2-lane road winding along the crest of the Blue Ridge Mountains from Virginia to North Carolina. It's famous for its overlooks, these pull-off areas where visitors can park and take in the views. There are hundreds of them along the parkway, some with picnic areas, some with trails, some just with a parking lot and a stone wall to keep people from driving off the edge. My job was to staff visitor centers, lead interpretive programs, and patrol sections of the parkway to assist visitors and document resources. In the summer, the parkway was crowded. thousands of tourists driving up from the lowlands to escape the heat, motorcyclists cruising the curves, hikers tackling the trails. Most overlooks would have a dozen cars by mid-morning, people taking photos and eating lunches. But there were a few overlooks that were always empty, even on the busiest summer weekends. One of them was called Beacon Heights at milepost 305, just south of Linville. Beacon Heights had a parking area and a short trail that led to a rocky outcrop with panoramic views of the Linville Gorge. It should have been popular. The views were spectacular, and the trail was easy, less than a half-mile round trip. But I'd noticed that every time I drove past, the parking lot was empty. I mentioned it to my supervisor, a man named Carl Winters, who'd worked the parkway for 20 years. He gave me a strange look. "You've been past Beacon Heights?" "Yeah, several times. I've never seen a car there." Carl nodded slowly. "That's not unusual. People don't like that overlook." "Why not?" He hesitated, then sighed. "Because something's wrong with it. Always has been. The Parkway Service has gotten complaints about Beacon Heights for decades. People say they feel watched, say the air feels heavy, say they get overwhelming feelings of dread when they pull in. We've had visitors drive into the lot, sit there for maybe 10 seconds, and then drive right back out. No explanation. They just don't want to be there." I frowned. "That doesn't make sense. It's just an overlook." "I know, but the complaints are consistent. About 5 years ago, we had a family, parents and 2 kids, pull into Beacon Heights for a picnic. They were there maybe 5 minutes when both kids started screaming. The mother said they were pointing at the woods near the trailhead, saying something was watching them from the trees. The father looked, but didn't see anything. They packed up and left. 2 hours later, they were in a car accident on the parkway, 10 miles south. Father died at the scene. Mother and kids survived. I felt a chill. "You think the 2 things are connected?" Carl shrugged. "I don't know. But I do know that Beacon Heights has a bad history. Before the parkway was built, there was an old logging camp in that area, back in the 1920s. Something happened there. An accident or a fight, the records aren't clear. Several men died. Their bodies were buried on site, and the camp was abandoned. When the parkway was constructed in the 1930s, they built the overlook right over the old camp. And ever since, people have avoided it. Has anyone investigated? Park Service, researchers, anyone? Once, back in the 80s, a psychologist from the university did a study on why people avoided certain locations. He spent a day at Beacon Heights, taking measurements, recording observations. He filed a report saying he experienced severe anxiety and feelings of being watched. He recommended the overlook be closed. The Parkway Service didn't act on the recommendation. You can't close an overlook just because it gives people bad vibes. But informally, we tell rangers to avoid the area unless absolutely necessary. I should have listened to that advice, but I was young and curious, and maybe a little arrogant. I wanted to see for myself what all the fuss was about. So one afternoon in mid-July, I drove to Beacon Heights. It was a beautiful day, mid-80s and sunny, the kind of day where the parkway was packed with visitors. I'd passed 3 overlooks on the way, all with full parking lots. When I pulled into Beacon Heights, it was deserted. I parked near the trailhead and got out. The first thing I noticed was the silence. The parkway is never truly quiet. Even in remote sections, you hear traffic, birds, wind through the trees. But Beacon Heights was silent in a way that felt unnatural. No birds, no insects. Even the wind seemed muted, as if the air itself were heavy. I stood by my car and looked around. The overlook was well maintained. The parking lot was clean. the stone wall in good repair, the trail clearly marked. But it felt wrong, like walking into a room where everyone has just stopped talking. I decided to hike the trail. It was only a quarter mile to the overlook, an easy walk on a graded path. I started up, moving slowly, paying attention to my surroundings. The forest on either side of the trail was dense: oak, maple, rhododendron. The understory was thick enough that I couldn't see more than 20 feet into the woods. About halfway up the trail, I got the feeling Carl had described. I was being watched. It wasn't subtle. It was a physical sensation, like eyes on the back of my neck, weight pressing against my shoulders. I stopped and turned around. The trail behind me was empty. I continued to the overlook, and the feeling intensified. By the time I reached the rocky outcrop, my heart was pounding. I stood at the edge and looked out at the view. The Linville Gorge spread out below me, miles of forested ridges and the silver thread of the river winding through the valley. It should have been beautiful. But all I felt was dread, a deep, primal fear that something was about to happen. I had an overwhelming urge to run, to get off that rock and back to my car as fast as possible. I forced myself to stay calm. I was a ranger. This was my job. I took out my notebook and made some observations: wind speed, temperature, visibility. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely write. That's when I heard it. A voice, faint and distant, coming from the woods below the overlook. A man's voice, calling out, "Help me, please, someone help me!" I moved to the edge of the rock and looked down. The slope below the overlook was steep, covered in thick brush and laurel. I couldn't see anyone. "Hello?" I called. "Where are you?" "Down here. I'm hurt. I can't move. Please help." The voice was closer now, maybe 50 feet down the slope. I could hear pain in it, desperation. Every instinct I had told me not to go down there, but I was a ranger, and someone was hurt. I radioed dispatch and reported a possible injured hiker below Beacon Heights Overlook. They asked if I had visual. I said no, but I could hear him calling for help. Dispatch told me to wait for backup. I said I would, but I moved to the edge of the slope to see if I could spot the person. "I'm coming down," I called. "Can you see me?" "Yes. Yes, I can see you." "Please hurry." "It's coming back." "What's coming back?" I shouted. "It. The thing in the trees. It dragged me down here. Please, you have to help me before it comes back." I started down the slope, using trees and bushes to keep from sliding. The brush was thick, branches tearing at my uniform. I kept calling out, asking the man to keep talking so I could find him. He responded, his voice guiding me deeper into the slope. "I'm here, right here. I can see you. Just a little further." I pushed through a stand of rhododendron and stopped. There was no one there. The slope was empty. I turned in a circle, scanning the area. "Where are you?" I shouted. "Right here." The voice was directly behind me. I spun around. Still nothing. And then I realized the voice wasn't coming from a person. It was coming from the trees themselves, echoing from multiple directions at once. "Right here, right here, right here." It repeated, overlapping. Dozens of voices now, all saying the same thing, in that same desperate, pained tone. I scrambled back up the slope, panic driving me. The voices followed, saying other things now. "Don't leave me. Please don't leave me. It's coming. It's here." I broke through the rhododendron and onto the overlook, my uniform torn, my hands scratched and bleeding. I ran down the trail to the parking lot, got in my car, and drove away. I didn't stop shaking until I reached the visitor center 10 miles south. I reported everything to Carl. He listened without interrupting, then told me he'd close the trail at Beacon Heights for maintenance and send a team to investigate. They spent 2 days searching the slope below the overlook and found nothing, no injured hiker, no sign of anyone in distress. But they did find something else. Bones. Old bones, dozens of them, scattered in the brush. The state archaeologist examined them and determined they were human, probably from the 1920s. They'd been there for nearly a century, buried in the soil and slowly working their way to the surface. Carl showed me the report. These are probably from the logging camp. Men who died in the accident. They were never properly buried, just covered with earth and left. The parkway construction might have disturbed the site, brought the bones closer to the surface. Or maybe they've always been there, and we just never looked. That doesn't explain the voices, I said. No, it doesn't. Carl looked tired, older than his years. Rebecca. There are places in these mountains where bad things happened, and the land remembers. I don't know if it's ghosts or echoes or something else, but Beacon Heights is one of those places. The dead are still there, and they're still calling for help. The best thing we can do is stay away and let them rest. The trail at Beacon Heights was officially closed for maintenance and never reopened. The Parkway Service installed a gate across the trailhead, and they removed the interpretive signs. The overlook is still there, and people still drive past it, but almost no one stops. I've driven past it myself a few times since that day, and every time, the parking lot is empty. But once, late in the evening, I saw a figure standing on the overlook rock, silhouetted against the sunset. I slowed down to get a better look, and the figure turned toward me. I couldn't make out features, but I got the impression of someone watching, waiting. I drove on and didn't look back. I left the Parkway Service in 2016 and took a job with the state park system, working campgrounds and day-use areas. I don't work the Blue Ridge anymore, but I think about Beacon Heights sometimes, about the voices in the trees and the bones in the brush. I think about all the people who've pulled into that overlook over the decades, felt that dread, and driven away without knowing why. And I think about the figure I saw standing on the rock, still calling for help after all these years. Some debts can never be repaid. Some tragedies can never be undone. And some places in the mountains will always be haunted by what happened there, long after the people who remember are gone.
The following account comes from someone who worked in the Monongahela National Forest and learned why the old-timers say you should never respond to your name being called in the West Virginia woods.
This happened in October of 2014, when I was 31 and working as a trail maintenance supervisor for the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. My name's Jake, I grew up in Elkins, and I'd been working in the Monongahela for 7 years. It's a massive forest, over 900,000 acres of mountains, rivers, and some of the most remote wilderness in the eastern United States. My job was to oversee trail maintenance crews, assess trail conditions after storms, and occasionally clear blowdowns or repair bridges. I spent a lot of time alone in the backcountry, which suited me fine. I'd grown up hiking these mountains, and I knew them as well as anyone. In early October, I was assigned to assess a section of the Allegheny Trail in the Otter Creek Wilderness, a remote area in the northern part of the forest. Otter Creek was designated wilderness, meaning no vehicles, no motorized equipment, no development. The trails were rough and infrequently maintained, and the area saw limited use even during peak season. In October, after the leaves had started to fall, I might go days without seeing another person. I set out on a Monday morning, planning a 4-day loop through the wilderness. The weather was cool, mid-50s during the day, and dropping to the 30s at night, with clear skies and brilliant fall colors. The trail conditions were good for the first 2 days. Some minor blowdowns that I marked for later clearing. A few sections where erosion had washed out the tread, but nothing major. I camped near Otter Creek the first night and pushed deeper into the wilderness on the second day. Late in the afternoon of the second day, I was working my way up a ridge when I heard someone call my name. Jake? It was a woman's voice, clear and close, maybe 20 yards away. I stopped and looked around. The forest was dense here, mixed hardwoods with thick understory, and I couldn't see far in any direction. "Hello?" I called back. No response. I waited, listening. The woods were quiet, just wind in the trees and the distant sound of the creek below. I figured I'd misheard something, maybe a bird call or the wind, and kept hiking. 10 minutes later, I heard it again. "Jake?" The same voice, still close, but this time it came from behind me. I turned around. The trail was empty. "Who's there?" I shouted. Nothing. I felt uneasy now, but I told myself it was just the isolation playing tricks on me. I'd been alone in the woods for 2 days, and your mind can do strange things when you're by yourself that long. I made camp that night on a flat ridge top, about a quarter mile off the trail. It was a good site, level ground, a small clearing, a trickle of water nearby. I set up my tent, cooked dinner, and settled in as the light faded. The temperature was dropping fast, and I could see my breath in the beam of my headlamp. Around 9 o'clock, I crawled into my tent and tried to sleep. I woke up around midnight to the sound of my name being called. Jake, 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 3 times, each one louder than the last. It was coming from outside my tent, from the direction of the trail. The voice was still a woman's voice, but something about it was off now. The tone was flat, emotionless, like someone reading words without understanding them. I sat up and grabbed my flashlight. "Who is that?" I called out. The voice stopped. I unzipped my tent and shone my light toward the trail. Nothing. The forest was absolutely still. No wind, no animal sounds, nothing. I stepped out of my tent and swept the area with my light. The clearing was empty. "This isn't funny," I shouted. "Identify yourself." The voice came again, but this time it was from a different direction, somewhere off to my left, deeper in the woods. "Jake, come here, Jake." Then from my right, "Jake, over here." Then from behind, "Jake." The voices were overlapping now, coming from multiple directions, all identical, all calling my name in that same flat, wrong tone. I backed toward my tent, my heart hammering. The voices continued, circling around me, always staying just beyond the reach of my flashlight. I got back in my tent and zipped it shut, my hands shaking. The voices kept calling for another 20 minutes, sometimes close enough that I could hear them right outside the tent fabric, sometimes distant and echoing through the trees. Then, abruptly, they stopped. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I sat in my tent with my flashlight and my knife, listening to the silence. When dawn finally came, I packed up as quickly as I could and started back toward the trailhead. I was done with the assessment. Whatever was out there, I didn't want to spend another night in the Otter Creek wilderness. I was maybe 2 miles from my camp, moving fast down the ridge trail, when I heard it again. "Jake, wait." The voice was ahead of me now, on the trail. I stopped. About 50 feet ahead, where the trail curved around a large oak tree, I saw movement. A figure stepped out onto the trail. It was a woman, middle-aged, wearing a red jacket and jeans. She was looking right at me. "Jake, I need help," she said. I felt relief flood through me. It was a real person, not whatever had been calling my name the night before. "Are you okay?" I called out. "Are you lost?" She didn't answer. She just stood there, looking at me with a blank expression. I moved closer, and as I did, I realized something was wrong. Her clothes were dirty, stained with what looked like mud or old blood. Her hair was matted, hanging in tangles around her face. And her eyes, they were wrong. Too wide, too empty, like there was nothing behind them. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" I said, stopping about 20 feet away. She tilted her head to the side, the movement too slow, too deliberate. "Jake," she said. "Come closer, Jake." That's when I noticed her feet. She wasn't standing on the trail. She was standing about 6 inches above it, her boots hovering in the air. I felt ice run through my veins. "What are you?" I whispered. Her mouth opened wider than it should have been able to, and more voices came out, dozens of them, all overlapping. "Jake, Jake, come here, Jake. We've been waiting, Jake." She started moving toward me, gliding above the trail, her feet never touching the ground. I ran. I turned and bolted back the way I'd come, off the trail and into the woods. Behind me, I could hear the voices, now coming from everywhere at once. "Jake, where are you going? Come back, Jake. We just want to talk, Jake." I crashed through the brush, branches tearing at my face and arms, my pack catching on everything. I didn't know where I was going. I'd left the trail and I was disoriented, but I knew I had to get away from whatever that thing was. I ran for maybe 15 minutes before I stumbled into a dry creek bed and fell, twisting my ankle. I lay there gasping, listening. The voices had stopped. The forest was silent again. I got to my feet, testing my ankle, painful but not broken, and looked around. I was in a narrow hollow, steep slopes on both sides, the creek bed winding down toward what I hoped was Otter Creek. If I could reach the creek, I could follow it downstream to one of the main trails. I started down the creek bed, moving as quietly as I could. My ankle throbbed with every step, but I ignored it. I had to get out of the wilderness. After about half an hour, I heard water and felt relief. I'd found Otter Creek. I pushed through the rhododendron and came out on the bank. That's when I saw them. Figures standing in the creek. There were 5 of them, spread out across the water, all facing me. Men and women, different ages, all wearing outdoor clothing from different eras, some in modern hiking gear, others in older clothes, jeans and flannel and canvas jackets. They stood perfectly still in the current, water flowing around their legs, all watching me with those same empty eyes. One of them spoke, a man in the center. "Jake, we've been waiting for you, Jake." The others joined in. "Jake, Jake, Jake." Their mouths moved in unison, perfectly synchronized, and the sound echoed up and down the creek valley. I backed away slowly, then turned and scrambled up the opposite slope. My ankle screamed in protest, but I didn't stop. I climbed until I hit another trail. I didn't know which one, didn't care, and followed it east, toward where I hoped the forest boundary was. The voices followed me for a while, always behind me, always calling my name, but gradually they faded. I hiked for 6 hours, my ankle swelling, my water running out, until I finally hit a forest road. I flagged down a pickup truck, a local man heading into Elkins, and he drove me to the ranger station. I was dehydrated, exhausted, and borderline hypothermic. The forest supervisor, a woman named Margaret Chen, took my statement. I told her everything. The voices, the woman on the trail, the figures in the creek. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she nodded slowly. "You're not the first," she said quietly. "We've had reports from Otter Creek Wilderness going back to the 70s. Hikers hearing their names called, seeing figures that don't behave like people, experiencing encounters. We've had 3 disappearances in that area in the last 20 years. None of the bodies were ever found." "What are they?" I asked. Margaret shook her head. "We don't know. The local people, the ones whose families have been in these mountains for generations, they call them the callers. They say the callers take the voices of people who've died in the woods, lost hikers, hunters who never came back, people who went out alone and were never found, and they use those voices to lure others in. Once they have your name, once you respond to them, they can follow you. They can appear to you. And if you go to them, if you let them get close, they take you too. Why didn't anyone warn me?" My voice was shaking, anger mixing with fear. "Because officially, the callers don't exist. The Forest Service can't acknowledge them. We can't put up signs that say, 'Don't respond when you hear voices calling your name.' We can't close wilderness areas because of folklore. All we can do is educate people informally, tell them the old rules. Don't hike alone, don't respond to voices you can't source. And if something feels wrong, trust your instincts and get out." She looked at me with something like sympathy. "You did the right thing by running, Jake. A lot of people don't. They're curious, or they think they're helping someone, and they follow the voices. That's when they disappear. I asked if there was any way to stop the callers, to clear them out of the wilderness. Margaret said there wasn't. They're part of the forest now, part of the mountains. They've been here longer than the trails, longer than the Park Service. All we can do is respect them and stay careful. I took 2 weeks off after that, and when I came back, I requested a transfer to a different district. I didn't want to work in the Otter Creek wilderness anymore. But before I left, I did some research. I went through old incident reports and found the pattern Margaret had mentioned. Since 1975, there had been 14 disappearances in or near the Otter Creek wilderness. All of them were solo hikers or hunters. In 6 cases, other hikers reported hearing voices calling names in the days before or after the disappearances. In 2 cases, witnesses saw figures standing in the forest or in the creek, figures that didn't move like normal people. I also found something else, a journal entry from a surveyor who'd worked in the area in 1903, before the National Forest was established. He wrote about hearing voices in the woods, voices that called his name and mimicked his dead wife's voice. He wrote that the local Cherokee and Shawnee people avoided the Otter Creek Valley, said it was a place where the boundary between the living and the dead was thin, where spirits could cross over and take the form of the living to lure people to their deaths. The surveyor left the area and refused to return, even when offered double pay. I work in the Potomac district now, far from Otter Creek. I don't do solo patrols anymore. And when I'm in the backcountry and I hear someone call my name, I don't respond. I don't look for the source. I just keep walking, my eyes forward, my pace steady. Because I know now that not every voice in the forest belongs to a living person. Some voices are echoes of the lost, used by things that should never be answered. And if you respond, if you acknowledge them, they know you. They can follow you, and eventually they'll add your voice to their collection.
This next testimony is from a ranger who patrolled the Daniel Boone National Forest in Kentucky and discovered what the locals mean when they warn about the Hollow People.
This happened in April of 2013, when I was 26 and working my second season as a backcountry ranger in the Daniel Boone National Forest in eastern Kentucky. My name's Amanda. I'm originally from Lexington, and I took the ranger job because I wanted adventure. Wanted to spend time in wild places. The Daniel Boone is a beautiful forest. Over 700,000 acres of sandstone cliffs, natural arches, gorges, and dense hardwood forest. It's also rugged and isolated, with sections that feel like they haven't changed in 1,000 years. In mid-April, I was assigned to patrol a remote area called Troublesome Creek in the northern section of the forest. Troublesome Creek was aptly named. It was a drainage system that ran through steep, narrow hollows with only a few primitive trails and no maintained campsites. The area saw very little use, mostly because access was difficult and there were easier, prettier places to hike elsewhere in the forest. But we still had to patrol it occasionally, checking for illegal activities, documenting trail conditions, that sort of thing. I drove out to the access point on a Tuesday morning, parked at a gravel pull-off, and started hiking up an old logging road that had been converted to a trail. The weather was mild, low 60s and partly cloudy, and the forest was just starting to green up after winter. I was planning a 3-day patrol loop that would take me up Troublesome Creek over a ridge and back down through an adjacent hollow. The first day was uneventful. I hiked about 8 miles, documented a few blowdowns and some erosion issues, and made camp near a small tributary stream. That evening, while I was cooking dinner, an old man appeared on the trail. He must have been 75 or 80, with a weathered face and clothes that looked like they were from another era. Canvas work pants, a faded denim shirt, heavy boots. He walked with a stick and moved slowly, but his eyes were sharp. "Evening," he said, stopping at the edge of my camp. "Evening," I replied, surprised to see anyone out here. "Are you hiking through?" He shook his head. "I live back up the hollow. Been here my whole life." Saw your camp and thought I'd come by. Make sure you knew about the area. I'm a ranger, I said. I'm just doing a routine patrol. He nodded slowly. Ranger or not, you need to know the rules. This is Troublesome Creek. There are things in these hollows that don't take kindly to strangers, especially after dark. I tried not to smile. I'd heard stories like this before, local folklore, old-timers trying to spook the city girl. I appreciate the concern, but I'll be fine. I've been doing this for a while. I'm sure you have, he said, not unkindly. But humor an old man. 3 rules for Troublesome Creek. First, don't leave your camp after full dark, not for any reason. Second, if you hear people talking in the woods at night, don't listen to what they're saying and don't try to find them. Third, if you see someone during the day who looks wrong, too pale, too thin, eyes too dark, don't engage with them. Just move on. What happens if I break the rules? I asked, still half joking. His expression hardened. You'll meet the hollow people, and once they know you, they don't forget. He turned and started back up the trail, moving faster than I would have thought possible for someone his age. Stay safe, Ranger, he called over his shoulder, and don't say I didn't warn you. I watched him disappear into the trees, feeling unsettled despite myself. I finished my dinner and cleaned up, then settled into my tent as darkness fell. Around 10 o'clock, I heard voices. They were distant at first, somewhere up the hollow, a conversation between multiple people. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was casual, almost cheerful. I listened for a while, curious. The voices were moving, getting closer. I remembered the old man's second rule. If you hear people talking in the woods at night, don't listen and don't try to find them. But I was a ranger. If there were people out here, campers, hikers, it was my job to make contact, make sure they were okay. I unzipped my tent and stepped out, flashlight in hand. The voices were much closer now, maybe 50 yards up the hollow beyond the trees. I could almost make out words. Should have seen down by the creek. Thought she'd never found. I started toward the voices, moving slowly, my light sweeping the forest. Hello? I called. Forest Service. Can you hear me? The voices stopped immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. No insects, no wind, no water sounds. Just dead silence. I stopped and waited, my heart starting to race. Is anyone there? I called again. Then the voices started again, but this time they were all around me, ahead, behind, to both sides. And they were saying my name now. Amanda, Amanda, Amanda. Over and over in different tones and pitches, like a dozen people all calling to me at once. I spun around, my light cutting through the darkness, but I saw nothing. The voices continued, overlapping, echoing through the hollow. Amanda, where are you going? Amanda, come back! Amanda, we want to talk to you. I ran back to my camp, stumbling over roots and rocks, and dove into my tent. I zipped it shut and sat there shaking, listening to the voices outside. They circled my tent for at least an hour, sometimes close enough that I could hear breathing between the words, sometimes distant and faint. I didn't sleep at all that night. At dawn, the voices stopped. I packed up quickly and continued my patrol, telling myself I'd just had a panic attack, that isolation and the old man's warnings had gotten to me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been out there, something that knew my name. On the second day, I was hiking along a ridge trail when I saw him, a man standing about 30 yards ahead, just off the trail, facing away from me. He was tall and thin, wearing old-fashioned clothes, dark trousers, and a white shirt. He stood perfectly still, not moving at all. I called out, "Excuse me, sir, are you okay?" He didn't respond. I moved closer, and that's when I noticed how pale he was. His skin had a grayish tint, almost like stone, and he was too thin, his frame gaunt, in a way that looked unhealthy. I stopped about 15 feet away. "Sir, can you hear me?" Slowly, very slowly, he turned around. His face was wrong. The features were there, eyes, nose, mouth, but they were stretched, distorted, like a mask that didn't quite fit. His eyes were completely black, no whites at all, just empty, dark holes. He looked at me, and his mouth opened. "Amanda," he said in a voice like wind through a cave, "we've been waiting for you." I backed away, my hand dropping to the bear spray on my belt. "Stay back," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He took a step toward me, and I saw that he wasn't walking. He was gliding, his feet not quite touching the ground. Behind him, more figures emerged from the trees. 5, 6, 7 of them, all with that same wrong appearance, too pale, too thin, eyes like empty holes. They moved together, closing in from both sides of the trail. I turned and ran. I didn't follow the trail. I just crashed straight down the slope, sliding and stumbling through the brush. Behind me, I could hear them following, moving through the forest with a sound like wind, calling my name in those hollow, echoing voices. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, and I collapsed behind a fallen log. I lay there gasping, listening. The forest was quiet. I carefully looked over the log. The slope above me was empty. I'd lost them. I stayed hidden for another 10 minutes, then got my bearings and started moving again, this time heading directly for the trailhead, abandoning the patrol. I hiked for 6 hours straight, not stopping except to catch my breath, until I reached my truck. I drove straight to the ranger station and reported what I'd seen. My supervisor, a man named Dennis Hart, listened to my story with a grim expression. When I finished, he sighed. "Amanda, I should have warned you before you went into Troublesome Creek. We've had reports from that area for years. The locals call them the Hollow People, entities that look like people but aren't. They live in the deep hollows, and they don't like outsiders. If they learn your name, they can call you, can follow you. Most people who encounter them get out okay, but we've had 2 disappearances in Troublesome Creek in the last decade. Both were solo hikers. We never found them." "What are the Hollow People?" I asked. Dennis shook his head. "Nobody knows. Local legend says they're the spirits of people who died in the hollows and couldn't find their way out. Lost miners, settlers, moonshiners. Some people think they're something older, something that was here before humans. Whatever they are, they're territorial. They don't like strangers, and they use fear and confusion to drive people out or to lead them deeper in until they're lost. Why don't we close the area? On what grounds? We can't close federal land because of folklore, and most people never encounter them. Troublesome Creek sees maybe a dozen visitors a year, and most of them have no problems. It's only the people who camp alone, who stay after dark, who seem to attract their attention." He looked at me seriously. "The old rules exist for a reason, Amanda. The people who live near Troublesome Creek, their families have been there for generations. They know what's in those hollows, and they know how to avoid it. We need to respect that knowledge." I transferred to a different district a month later. I couldn't work in the Daniel Boone anymore, couldn't shake the memory of those figures with their wrong faces and black eyes, the way they move without walking, the way they call my name. But before I left, I talked to the old man who'd warned me. I found his cabin up Troublesome Creek and knocked on his door. He invited me in, and we sat at his kitchen table while he made coffee. "You saw them," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. What are they, really?" He was quiet for a long time. My grandfather told me that when the coal companies came through here in the 1800s, they brought workers from all over. A lot of those men died. Cave-ins, explosions, disease. Some of them were buried in the hollows where they fell. No markers, no ceremony, just shallow graves. Their families never knew what happened to them. My grandfather said those men couldn't rest, couldn't move on. They stayed in the hollows, waiting for someone to acknowledge them, to remember them. Over the years, they changed, became something else, something that remembers being human but isn't human anymore. "The Hollow People," I said. He nodded. "They're drawn to the living, especially people who are alone. They want connection, want to be remembered, but they don't understand that they're dead. They try to communicate, try to reach out, but all they do is frighten people. And sometimes when someone stays too long, listens too hard, they pull that person in. Not out of malice, just loneliness. They want company. How do I make them stop following me? I asked. They know my name. He looked at me with sad, tired eyes. They'll forget eventually, as long as you don't go back. Don't return to Troublesome Creek. Don't speak about them more than you have to. And if you hear your name called in the woods, anywhere, don't answer. Because once they know you've heard them, they think you're listening. They think you'll come. I left Kentucky 2 months later and took a job with the National Park Service in the Southwest, as far from the Appalachian hollows as I could get. I work in deserts now, open spaces where you can see for miles, where the sun is bright and the shadows are short. I don't hike in forests anymore. I don't go into deep hollows. And when I hear my name called, which happens sometimes in quiet moments, usually at dusk, I don't turn around. I don't acknowledge it. I just keep walking, because I know they're still there in the dark places between the ridges, in the hollows where the sun doesn't reach. The hollow people, waiting, calling, remembering. And I know that if I answered, if I went back, they'd be there. They'd remember me, and I might not come out again.
Our final story tonight comes from a ranger who worked the Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina and found out why some of the old ranger stations are no longer used and why the doors are always locked.
This happened in November of 2012 when I was 35 and working as a district ranger for the Pisgah National Forest in western North Carolina. My name's Robert. I'm from Asheville, and I'd been with the Forest Service for 12 years. Pisgah is a stunning area, over 500,000 acres of mountain wilderness, waterfalls, and old-growth forest. It's also home to some of the oldest ranger infrastructure in the National Forest System, cabins and stations built in the 1920s and 30s, many of them still standing, but no longer in use. In early November, I was asked to do an assessment of one of these old stations, a place called Buckhorn Station, located deep in the forest about 15 miles from the nearest road. Buckhorn had been operational until the 1980s, when it was decommissioned and replaced by a newer facility closer to the main highway. The old station had been sitting empty ever since, slowly deteriorating. My assignment was to survey the structure, document its condition, and make a recommendation on whether it should be preserved as a historical site or demolished. I hiked in on a cold, overcast Monday morning. The trail to Buckhorn was overgrown. It hadn't been maintained in years, and it took me almost 5 hours to cover the 15 miles. The station sat in a small clearing on a ridgetop, surrounded by oak and hickory forest. It was a simple structure, a single-story log cabin with a stone chimney, a covered porch, and a small equipment shed out back. The logs were weathered gray, and the roof had a sag in the middle, but overall, the structure looked solid. The front door was secured with a heavy padlock, and there was a handwritten sign nailed to the doorframe. "Do not enter. Unsafe structure. Forest Service." The sign looked old, the paper yellowed and water-stained. I had a key for the padlock. The district office had given it to me before I left, and I unlocked it and pushed the door open. The interior smelled of mold and rot. The single room was maybe 20 feet by 20 feet, with a wood stove in one corner, a built-in bunk on one wall, a desk and chair near the window, and shelves along the back wall. Everything was covered in dust and cobwebs. There were old logbooks stacked on the desk, maps yellowed and curling on the walls, and a kerosene lantern sitting on a shelf. It looked like whoever had been stationed here last had just walked out and never come back. I spent an hour documenting the structure, taking photos, measuring dimensions, noting areas of decay. The roof was the main problem. Water damage had rotted several beams, and the whole thing would need to be replaced if we wanted to preserve the cabin. I was making notes when I found the journal. It was sitting on the desk, underneath a stack of old survey maps. A leather-bound notebook, about 5 by 8 inches, the cover water-stained and cracked. I opened it and saw handwritten entries, dated from June through August of 1983. The handwriting was neat, precise, the entries short. June 15th, 1983. Clear weather, patrolled South Ridge, no incidents. June 22nd, 1983. Heavy rain, stayed at station. Repaired stove. July 4th, 1983. Heard noises outside station last night. Investigated at dawn. No tracks, no signs of animals. I flipped through the pages. The entries continued in the same vein until late July, when the tone changed. July 28, 1983. Something is watching the station. I can feel it when I'm outside. No visual confirmation. August 2nd, 1983. Heard footsteps on the porch last night. Heavy footsteps, like boots. I called out. No response. When I opened the door, nothing was there. August 5th, 1983. The footsteps came again. They walk around the station, circling it, always at the same time. 2 a.m. I don't go outside anymore after dark. August 10th, 1983. It knocked on the door tonight. 3 slow knocks, then silence. I didn't open the door. The entries stopped after August 10th. The last page had a single line, written in a shaky hand. It's trying to get in. I can hear it scratching at the walls. I don't know how much longer the door will hold. I felt a chill run down my back. I closed the journal and looked around the cabin. In the daylight, it seemed harmless, just an old, abandoned building. But reading those entries, I felt the isolation, the fear that the ranger, whoever he'd been, had experienced. I packed up my gear and decided to finish the assessment quickly. I didn't want to be here after dark. I was photographing the exterior when I noticed something I'd missed before. Scratches on the door, deep gouges in the wood, running parallel, like claw marks. They were old, the wood inside the gouges weathered gray, but they were unmistakable. Something with claws had tried to get into the station. I examined the walls and found more scratches, all around the structure, concentrated near the windows and the door. I radioed the district office and reported what I'd found. My supervisor, a woman named Ellen Briggs, asked me to read her the journal entries. I did, and when I finished, there was a long silence. Robert, I need you to leave the station immediately. Do not stay there after dark. Do you understand? Ellen, what's going on? Just get out of there. I'll explain when you get back. I didn't argue. I locked the door, pocketed the journal, and started back down the trail. It was already past 4 o'clock, and with the short November days, I had maybe 90 minutes of daylight left. I hiked fast, pushing myself, but the overgrown trail slowed me down. By 5:30, the light was fading, and I was still at least 5 miles from my truck. I was moving through a section of dense rhododendron when I heard it. Footsteps behind me on the trail. Heavy footsteps, the sound of boots on leaves. I stopped and turned around. The trail was empty. I waited, listening. The footsteps stopped. I started walking again, and the footsteps resumed, keeping pace with me. Turned again, faster this time. Nothing. "Who's there?" I called out. No response. The footsteps continued, now sounding closer, maybe 20 feet behind. I could hear the rhythm of them, steady and deliberate. I started running, my pack bouncing, my breathing ragged. The footsteps ran too, matching my pace exactly. I didn't look back. I just focused on the trail ahead, on getting out of the forest before full dark. I made it to my truck just as the last light faded from the sky. The footsteps had followed me the entire way, never stopping, never falling behind. When I reached the trailhead, I spun around, flashlight in hand. The trail was empty. The footsteps had stopped. I drove to the district office and found Ellen waiting for me. She took the journal and read through it, her face grim. When she finished, she looked up at me. The ranger who wrote this was named Tom Gerard. He worked Buckhorn Station from 1981 to 1983. In August of 83, he radioed in to say he was abandoning the station, that something was wrong and he couldn't stay there anymore. We sent a team up to bring him out. But when they arrived, the station was empty. Tom was gone. They found signs of a struggle, furniture overturned, scratches on the walls, the door broken from the inside. But no, Tom. What happened to him? We don't know. We searched for 3 weeks and never found a trace. No body, no gear, nothing. The official report said he'd probably gotten disoriented and fallen somewhere remote. But the rangers who searched the area said they heard things. Footsteps following them, sounds of someone moving through the brush. One of them said he saw a figure standing near the station at dusk, tall and dark, watching him. When he approached, it vanished. What do you think it was? Ellen shook her head. I don't know. But Buckhorn has a history. Before Tom, there were 3 other rangers who worked that station, and all of them reported strange experiences. Noises, shadows, feelings of being watched. The Forest Service decommissioned Buckhorn in 1984 and sealed the station. We don't send people there anymore, or at least we didn't, until you. Why did you send me? Because the higher-ups don't believe in ghost stories. They wanted an assessment for historical preservation, and you were available. I should have warned you, Robert. I'm sorry. I went home that night, but couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Tom Gerard, about those final entries in the journal, about the scratches on the door and walls. What had he seen? What had been trying to get into the station? And what had happened to him when it finally succeeded? 2 days later, Ellen called me into her office. We're not preserving Buckhorn Station. The decision came from the regional office. The structure is too unstable and too remote. We're going to let it collapse naturally. What about Tom Gerard? What about finding out what happened to him? The case is closed, Robert. It's been closed for 30 years. All we can do now is make sure no one else has to experience what he did. I accepted that, but I couldn't let it go. Over the next few months, I researched the history of Buckhorn Ridge. I found old newspaper articles about the area, about disappearances that dated back to the 1800s. Hunters, hikers, even a surveying crew in the 1920s, all reported strange occurrences in the Buckhorn area. The local Cherokee had a name for the ridge, place where shadows walk. They avoided it, said it was home to something old and angry, something that didn't tolerate human presence. In one article from 1936, I found an interview with an old mountaineer who'd lived near Buckhorn his whole life. He said the ridge was cursed, that something lived up there that took the form of whatever it hunted. It walks like a man, he said, but it ain't a man. It's got no face, just shadow. And if it starts following you, you can't outrun it. It'll follow you home if it has to. Only way to survive is to not look at it, not acknowledge it. Just keep moving until you're off the ridge. I never went back to Buckhorn Station. I transferred to a different district the following year and eventually left the Forest Service altogether. But I still have Tom Gerard's journal. I keep it in a locked drawer, and sometimes I take it out and read those final entries. I think about him often, wonder if he's still up there on that ridge somewhere, or if whatever was scratching at his door finally got what it wanted. And I think about the footsteps that followed me down the trail, about how they matched my pace exactly, how they never stopped until I left the forest.
There are places in the Appalachian Mountains that belong to something else, something that was here long before we were. Buckhorn Ridge is one of those places. The Forest Service knows it, the locals know it, and now you know it too. And if you ever find yourself hiking in Pisgah, if you ever see an old log cabin on a ridge top with a padlocked door and a warning sign, don't go inside, don't even stop, just keep walking. Because some doors are locked for a reason, and some places should stay empty. The stories you've heard tonight are testimonies from men and women who've worked in the Appalachian wilderness, who've walked trails most of us will never see, who've spent nights in places where the boundary between the known and the unknown grows thin. These mountains are old, older than the trails we've cut through them, older than the towns we built in their shadows. They have their own rules, their own inhabitants, and their own ways of dealing with those who don't respect them. The rangers who shared their stories survived. They got out, found their way back to safety, and lived to tell about what they experienced. But others haven't been so lucky. Every year, people disappear in the Appalachian Mountains, hundreds of them in national forests and parks from Georgia to Maine. Most are found eventually, lost or injured, but alive. Some are found dead, victims of falls or exposure or simple bad luck. But there are always a few who are never found at all, who walk into the trees and vanish as completely as if the earth had opened up and swallowed them. The rangers know the truth about these mountains. They know about the stairs that lead nowhere, the voices that call your name, the figures that watch from the tree line. They know about the hollows where shadows walk and the ridges where something old still hunts. They know, and they do their best to keep people safe, to enforce the rules, to close the trails when something is wrong. But they can't protect everyone. The Appalachians are vast and wild, and there are places where human authority means nothing. So if you find yourself in these mountains, respect them. Stay on the marked trails. Don't hike alone. Don't ignore the warnings that locals give you, even if they sound like superstition. And if you see something that doesn't feel right, stairs in the forest, figures that don't move like people, voices calling to you from the dark, trust your instincts. Turn around. Get out. Because the rangers can't save you if you go looking for trouble. No one can. Thank you for listening to Blacktop Files. If you have your own story from the Appalachian Mountains, or from any other place where the darkness feels deeper than it should, you can submit it through the link in the description. Stay safe out there, and remember, not all trails lead home.